Hello and welcome everybody. My name is Dr. Arvin Arwin and today I'm going to be giving you a mini lecture on Nazi propaganda. My research specialism is Nazi Germany and the end of World War II, and this lecture is part of one of my modules on the Third Reich. I also teach on the Weimar Republic, Germany during World War I, and Germany after 1945. So I really specialise and teach in all things Germany in the 20th century. So today we're going to focus on a couple of main points I will go into in a moment, but I'd just like to draw your attention and a bit of a trigger warning really. There are some images of Nazi propaganda which could be potentially offensive to some people. There's some anti-Semitic images in this lecture, just to warn anybody, just in case this might cause offence. So, Nazi propaganda. So this mini lecture is basically going to make two key points about Nazi propaganda. And in doing that, hopefully bust some of the myths that a lot of people hold about Nazi propaganda. And the first thing that I want you to leave this lecture understanding is that Nazi propaganda did not actually change people's political views or change their mind. It did not indoctrinate Germans to suddenly believe in everything that Hitler said and to become fully fledged Nazis. That is a myth, and I will explain why in a moment. Also, the other thing I'd like you to take from this lecture is the reason propaganda worked well in Germany and in Nazi Germany was because a lot of the themes included in Nazi propaganda actually spoke to beliefs that Germans already held. So what I mean by that is a lot of the themes discussed in Nazi propaganda were already things that people believed in, not wholly. They might have believed in one thing or the other, and therefore this is why it worked. It wasn't that Nazi propaganda changed how people's worldview was, what people believed in, but rather it really mirrored what people actually already believed. So how are we going to look at these key points? How are we going to make these key points? Well, we're going to be using the work of historians such as David Welsh. We're going to be looking at some of the principal themes that come up in Nazi propaganda. And then we're going to look at how these spoke to these preconceived ideas held by Germans. So to add to that, I'd like to make some important points about propaganda and how it works in general, but also within the context of Nazi society. So number one, and I'd really like you to remember these, is propaganda is more about confirming people's beliefs than converting them. So this will become more evident as we go through this lecture. Also, the propaganda was part of a larger system implemented by the Nazis. So it worked alongside other things such as social welfare programs, initiatives for workers that were very attractive to them, but also as well among the German people, a general support for the foreign policy achievements that the Nazis managed, especially during the peace period and those early years of World War II. That's for people who conformed to Nazism. On the flip side of that as well, it's part of a larger system which also included terror for those who didn't conform to the Nazi worldview. And of course, when we think of terror during the Third Reich, we think automatically of concentration camps, the security services such as the Gestapo, and the surveillance of the German population and terror and violence enacted against them. So remember that propaganda is a part of a larger system for people who conformed, but also on the flip side, a part of this terror system as well. And one thing to remember when we look at propaganda, and this is not only in the Third Reich, but any propaganda that you look at, is that when we look at propaganda, it tells us nothing about what people think. But instead, it tells us what the government wants to tell people. And this is an important distinction. I see this a lot in undergraduate essays where people look at propaganda, read it as a primary source, and then assume that this demonstrates to us what the German people thought, for example. No, it doesn't tell us that at all. It tells us rather what in this case, the Nazis wanted to tell people, or how the Nazis wanted to spin something. So these are some of those important points to remember as we go through this lecture. So the first key point I would like to make is that propaganda did not change people's minds. So most people believe, and this is a common belief, the myth that propaganda indoctrinated Germans and turned them almost into sort of Hitler-loving zombies. There's a conception among most people that people before Nazi propaganda, German people before Nazi propaganda, had not believed in Nazism at all, and believed in none of the ideas of Nazism, and then Nazi propaganda came along and changed everything. This is not the case. And much of the work by historians over the last sort of 20 to 30 years has done a lot to overturn this understanding of Nazi propaganda. And in particular, I'd like to draw your attention to historians such as David Welsh, who's worked extensively on Nazi propaganda, and of course Ian Kershaw, the famous Hitler biographer. He's also worked on Nazi propaganda. And these historians have worked to change this view of propaganda and to give us a more complex understanding of how propaganda actually works. And so according to David Welsh, for propaganda to work, it needs to speak to a preconceived belief. And therefore, propaganda is far more about confirming what people already think than converting people. So rather than changing people's view altogether, Nazi propaganda spoke to various parts of people's beliefs that existed already. So how are we going to explore this idea? Well, we're going to look at various themes in Nazi propaganda. We're mainly going to be looking at image propaganda, posters and the like, but I will also talk a little bit about other types of propaganda as well. So just to remember that propaganda includes images, but also it can be films, speeches, educational materials, even things like rituals are all part of a broader propaganda program. So the first theme we're going to be looking at that was common in Nazi propaganda has got to do with the Volksgemeinschaft, or people's community, and national unity. So the people's community, Volksgemeinschaft, was an idea that was very important to the Nazis. They wanted to reorganize German society and later European society based on a racial hierarchy, at which the Germans, of course, the Aryans, would be at the top. And they wanted to create a people's community, a Volksgemeinschaft, in which the class distinctions and party political distinctions no longer existed. And this is a theme that was very, very important in their propaganda. And we can sort of see this if we look at the image with the family. Here, this is about creating these are members of the people's communities, about creating healthy Aryans. This image with the family is a racialized image. It demonstrates what Aryan Germans should look like, and is an idealized version of the people's community. These are obviously racially acceptable people according to the Nazis, and therefore form an important part of that Volksgemeinschaft. And this is an important concept to remember if you are interested in any in Nazi history. The other theme, which was very important, which was national unity. I'm sure you already know that Germany and Germans felt a great sense of loss after Versailles, and a sense of loss of national pride and national defeat. And therefore, the Nazis really did push an idea of German unity as a nation, and the importance of nationalism is paramount within their ideology. And this image, the one with the picture of Germany and the swastika and the people around it, celebrates that. This is from 1938, when the Anschluss happened, the connection of Germany with Austria, or the annexation of Austria by Germany, and demonstrates this sense of the Volksgemeinschaft, the German people, and a sense of national unity. So that's one key theme that is very pervasive in Nazi propaganda. The next one, of course, is charismatic leadership. And here's the one which I think stands out to most people. We always see these images, newsreels of Hitler going past adoring crowds, this sense of Hitler embodying the nation. He's the charismatic leader who will take Germany to be great again, and to take Germany into the future. And a lot of Nazi propaganda very much has this as a central part of its themes. If you just Google Nazi propaganda, it's primarily this theme that you will see emerge. And here we have, of course, on the left, images of Hitler with the future, the people, the children. He's a man who's very much looking towards German youth. And this was actually a book. The title is Children, What Do You Know About the Führer? So you can see that a book here targeted at children is being used as propaganda. Then in the other images, we have posters demonstrating adoring crowds, Hitler as a strong leader, Hitler looking to the future in the poster on the right. So charismatic leadership was a very, very important theme that we see continually in Nazi propaganda. Another one, of course, that was very important for Nazi propaganda was enemies. And enemies, of course, by distinguishing who your enemies are, this allows the people's community to come together. By defining enemies, it creates a sense of unity. And so it's almost like the juxtaposition to the Volksgemeinschaft, to the people's community, in a sense of national unity. So, of course, the two main enemies, according to the Nazis, were, of course, the Jews and Bolshevism. So communism in the form that existed in the USSR, in the Soviet Union. And so in these images here, we see these very crude anti-Semitic images. In the image on the left, what we see here is the poster says, "You are responsible for the war." And this comes from the wartime, where the Nazis tried to blame the bombing of Germany on a international Jewish conspiracy. And this is why we have this Jewish person portrayed in this very anti-Semitic way, but also portrayed as a kind of banker or somebody with influence, because they're trying to say that there's an international sort of conspiracy of powerful Jewish people. This is, of course, absolute nonsense, but this is what the Nazis were trying to sell. And then on the right, here we have the two great enemies being brought together. We have an image of this very anti-Semitic image of a Jew. And here as well, the way that the man is portrayed is to accentuate a kind of grotesque, trying to sort of frighten people. And as you can see, just on the right above his arm is a picture of the Haran sickle. And so here, of course, they are equating Bolshevism to Judaism and are trying to say that they are one and the same. And this is very important, this idea, for how the Holocaust develops during World War I. And this poster is actually from a film, The Eternal Jew, Der ewige Jude, which was a propaganda film that was highly anti-Semitic, produced by the Nazis. So as you can see, enemies are also an important theme in the propaganda. And then the fourth great big theme that we see is of racial purity. And these are themes that sort of you can see throughout Nazi propaganda. As you know, the Nazis believed that the world should be ordered, or definitely Germany should be ordered, along a racial hierarchy, at which the Aryans stood at the top. And these two images on the left of young German youth, of course, the typical sort of Aryan, healthy, strong, that would take Germany into a new era of National Socialism, and that would produce more and more healthy, strong Germans. Then just to the right of that, we have images which reflect the darker side of these ideas surrounding racial purity. The idea that disabled people were subhuman, or did not have the right to live because of the fears that disability was is hereditary, and therefore would impact the racial purity of the German people. And again, here we have an image of a film, and we also have an image of eugenics. Basically here they're trying to, in this image, here they're trying to say that that disabled people cost too much money and therefore a burden on the state. Absolutely abhorrent views, but these are the themes that we see in Nazi Germany. So, how do these themes therefore appeal to the German people? Well, all these broader themes of national unity, charismatic leadership, these enemies of the German people, and racial purity were all themes that broadly appealed to many Germans since the 19th century anyway. So not all Germans believed all four of these, and not all Germans believed them to the extent that the Nazis did. However, some of these ideas did broadly appeal to broad areas of society in Germany. Ideas of the Volksgemeinschaft in particular. A number of people thought about this sense of national unity was very important to them. There was latent anti-Semitism across Europe in this period. Many people, not just in Germany, but beyond Germany, hated communism and saw Bolshevism as a real threat to the world order. And therefore, these were themes that people generally believed. And so, at the beginning in particular, we see the Nazis basically change and shape their propaganda to fit ideas that already broadly appealed to people. And this is where the Nazis really were clever with their propaganda. What they did was to tailor propaganda to suit the audiences. So, for example, in regions of Germany that were historically not anti-Semitic, they would not use so much anti-Semitic propaganda. In areas that were historically more anti-Semitic, they did use and rely on the theme of anti-Semitism more. Or another way in which they tailored propaganda was, for example, in areas that had many workers, in working class areas. They would produce propaganda that appealed to them. And so by doing this, they drew on themes that were important to people anyway, tailored them to suit the audience, and therefore were able to produce propaganda that was quite successful. And this propaganda, of course, worked alongside these other broader parts of the Nazi system, as I mentioned earlier, terror, but also for people who were complying to the regime benefits in social welfare and in how the workers were treated. And so therefore, propaganda worked with these other elements, alongside these other elements. So just to finish up then, I would like to reiterate those two key points that I've made. Number one, that the Nazis' propaganda did not change people's minds. And number two, that it spoke broadly to ideas that German people, vast swathes of German people, not everybody, but a number of German people held, and that they could pick and choose from. It demonstrates to us that the Nazis were clever. They listened to what people wanted and changed and altered their propaganda to suit that. So again, as I said, my name is Dr. Arddin Arwyn. If you have any questions, you can contact me on this email address, and follow us on Twitter at AberHistorians. And if you need anything, or if you've got any questions or would like to give some feedback, please do. Thank you very much for listening. Goodbye.